Hey guys, Shah here, and today I'm going to be nerding about the Ardenweald dungeons, including both Mists of Tirna Scithe and the other side. Similar to my previous video, I'm going to be going over my thoughts about the route and how the dungeon feels overall, and talking about some tips that I've picked up while running both these dungeons on beta and on live. I'm going to try to make this video a little shorter than last time, but with no promises. Let's dive in. Alright, so we're going to start off in the dungeon Mist of Tirna Scithe. I feel like this dungeon has a lot more curiosity or interest of a lot of players. It's a lot better of a dungeon. The design is kind of cool. It's engaging. There's a lot of little mechanics you can do, whether you're a Night Fae, whether you're trying to get through the maze, and there's a lot of optional paths in this last dungeon. So I think this is going to be a favorite among the community, especially once seasons begin and people get to start playing with like prideful spawnings and stuff. But let's talk about exactly what is going on. So if you aren't familiar, Night Faes actually have a lot of tools that they can access in this dungeon. So they have a skip, they have 2 different spawn points that they can activate for their group, and they have like buffs that they can give players. So to start it off at the very start of the dungeon, if you didn't know, you can actually open up a door right to the left. So as soon as you walk into the left, there's a door that you can kind of break down, or some routes that you can remove. And it's going to give you access to skip this pack here. It's not a big skip, but honestly, the less villagers you have to deal with, the better. If you can only deal with 1 villager, which is this pack here, it's going to be great. They do have True Sight, so you have to be careful as a stealth class trying to sneak past these guys. So you're not really able to shroud. Maybe you're able to shroud on the back end, but I'm not sure because this villager is here, but I haven't tried it. But we decided to actually pull all these mobs together, build them up with cooldowns, and use a rogue skip to shroud the boss room. The cool thing about this skip here is that if you want, you can skip to this corner right here. You can sap this soul cleaver, and then everyone's actually able to leave the shroud, and you're able to open this door if you have a knife in your group and get your buffs. Now, in this room, there's going to be buffs that players can grab. They're pink and purple mushrooms. No, they're pink. Sorry, pink and green mushrooms, or purple and green mushrooms. If you're colorblind, I don't know what colors they are, but you're able to grab buffs. So the green mushrooms are going to be stats. It's going to be 10% main stat, and the like purple / pink or red, or whatever color you see them, are going to be like stamina increase. More than likely, you're going to prefer stats in almost all circumstances. Very rarely will you need stamina. Maybe if there's like a one-shot mechanic, or maybe if like you want to use your time getting these bow breakers down, you might pick up stam here for this pack and then go back and grab stats for boss. But honestly, I would just grab stats. It's going to give you a lot better time getting these mobs down. You're going to have a higher DPS throughput, healing throughput, and survivability throughput as a tank. Once you get your buffs, at whatever point you want to grab your buffs, I would defeat these bow breakers as well as this pack here, and the reason for that is because of Prideful. So at a plus 10 level, you're going to have a Prideful lad that spawns, which upon defeating it is going to give you like a massive DPS and HPS boost, which is going to allow you to get bosses down a lot quicker. More often than not, Prideful is going to be probably better used on either very large pulls or bosses with hero. So you're going to have a lot of room here. What I would recommend doing is opening up this door, defeating these packs, and then while you're fighting the Prideful lad, grab your mushrooms, because you're single target damaging a mob down, so you have kind of time to run around and grab some things if you need to. Once you defeat this boss, I won't talk about this boss too long. All you have to do is attack the Birdman, Droman, defeat him down to 20%, and then he makes him take Ingra take increased damage for like 15 seconds. And then this is when you can hero, blow him up with cooldowns. You'll have your Prideful buff more than likely, and you could probably try to one-phase him. Once you defeat this boss, you're going down to the maze, and a lot of people have questions about this maze. And I'm not going to talk about how to get through it. I'm not going to talk about like a premier strategy to try to figure out which like door you need to open. There's tons of sites. There's tons of content creators already talking about that. I think Growl and Dratnos both already did. I'm going to link the Mythic Trap Dungeon guide down below. Again, they did a phenomenal job on their site. They're still working on it. They're getting raid content out now. But go check out that site, and you can actually practice this mechanic on a site. So when you get into this dungeon, you're like kind of ready. How you're going to do this is up to you. When I'm healing or when I'm like helping with the doors, I just like repeat to myself. There's not a lot of mechanics going on during a lot of these pulls. So I just kind of repeat to myself the doors that I've looked at already. And I just go in an order, just in a, either clockwise or counterclockwise around the room. And that's not hard to remember for me. The best person for this will probably be your healer, since there's not a lot of, as long as everyone's mitigating and locking down the certain mobs that need to be locked down, more than likely the healer is going to have to do very minimal in this room. They can try to do as much DPS as possible, like putting out your Sunfire, cast Chain Lightning and stuff like that, but they'll probably be trying to figure out which door. The thing about this maze though is the percentages throughout the maze is actually going to be fairly consistent. Best case scenario, you're going to average at like a 35 percentile for this room. There is a route that I've pulled before that has you kind of go up this way, like you come into here, down here, and then you loop around, and this path can actually give you a lower percentage count than you would want, where this route here around the very edge is going to give you a little bit higher percentage than you're going to probably want. This route around the edge is going to put you about 37. This route around this edge is going to give you about a 30, it's like a 33, but more often than not, you're going to be right in the middle at a 35 mark, so you can time out Pridefuls pretty well. That's why I like pulling the front of the dungeon like this, because you're not only are you going to get a good first Prideful, but your second Prideful, best case scenario, is going to be right before you have to do one of these mini bosses, whether it's this mini boss here, or it's going to be this mini boss here, or even this one up here. You're going to have a Prideful for that mini boss, and it's going to make that room go a lot quicker. One, it's single targets, your group's going to have lower damage. If you have any classes that are really good at doing AoE damage, but not so good for single target, having a 10% or 25% damage buff for Prideful is going to obviously yield to be a huge boon for these rooms in particular. And then if you're lucky with the higher percentage route, you might get Prideful right before Mistcaller. If you don't, you're going to have it at the bottom of the hill. Mistcaller has a lot going on. I'll do some boss guides and some tips and tricks about bosses down the road. I'm going to try to cut them out of this video because it just takes up so much time. After you defeat Mistcaller, you're going to jump down the waterfall. This is where you're going to find one of those checkpoint pods. I didn't mention it before, but the other checkpoint pod is right before the maze area. You're going to see it right off to the left. I keep saying right off to the left. You're going to see it to the left as soon as you get to the bottom of the hill. It's going to be like this giant acorn thing. Just click on it. I think there's a small cast time, but it shouldn't take up too much of your time. Once you get to the bottom of the hill, I have found that the most optimal route, at least I think for my group, is going to be actually go to the left. The right puts you in a weird spot where you can't get as many of these like little larvas that don't do almost any damage, and they give actually a fair bit of percent. 0.4 per little mob here, so actually like 6 of them is actually going to be worth more than one of these giant staghorns, and because you can AoE them down, you're going to get more effective damage. But you're going to get a Prideful right here at the top of the hill, which you can either, I've opted in to do a big pull here. These Reavers pat back and forth. So if you happen to not have a Rogue or a Night Fae, and you had to pull this pack up here with the 2 Harvesters, the Soul Cleaver, and the Bow Breaker, you're going to have a little bit extra percent. So you can choose to skip these Reavers by pulling this pack backwards, and then waiting for this patrol to like fly overhead, and then you can pull forward to have a little less percent if you need. If not, in this route particularly, I just plan on just blowing this pack up, doing this blue pack here, making sure we're locking down the Staghorn. The Staghorn is what you're going to want to kick. It does like it applies like an absorb shield, and it applies a heal to the group. Kick those at all cost. And then when you do this next pack, it's going to give you Prideful to do the next pack, this purple pack here. And then you're going to skip to the other side of the room, do this pack here, make sure you're locking down the Staghorn again, and this is going to give you your last Prideful right before you do Tredova. So that's the route that I currently have planned for my group. Again, the most effective way to make this dungeon like just be smooth is making sure you know how to do the maze properly. It's not really the packs. The percentage in the maze is actually going to be fairly consistent around that 35% mark. For whatever reason, if you got really, I guess I would say unlucky, and you got a little bit lower percentage in here, I would just recommend like grabbing either, like you can drop this Reaver pull here, and you'll grab, let's see, you'll grab this these 2 Reavers here. These Reavers aren't too bad. You just can blow them up pretty quickly. They have a little bit lower health pool than the Staghorns, and they're worth the same amount of percent. Well, fairly the same amount of percent. This is what I would recommend doing instead. You'll get your last Prideful then after you defeat these Reavers, and then you don't have to worry about these guys over here and tagging them. But the change in that route is fairly minimal. You don't need a Rogue. It's just a Rogue makes it so you can deal with less of the shittier trash, because these Harvesters can do so much damage, and these Bow Breakers do a lot of AoE damage that your healer will more than likely need cooldowns to survive, and you're going to have to deal with 2 of them later. So dealing with one here and wasting cooldowns earlier is going to be bad. So Rogue is going to be beneficial for this skip, but outside of that, you can always make it up with these Reavers at the end by dropping one of these packs, and that's what I like about this dungeon, is that at the very end you can change the route if you need to. But that's pretty much it. That's a quick little 9-minute route. That's what my group has planned. Again, I'm lucky because I have both Night Fae players and Rogues like in my arsenal of players I play with, so it's going to be pretty luxurious having both of those accessible. Now, for whatever reason, let's say we have no Rogue. So I do have a no Rogue Shroud, which will require you to pull this starting mob here. You can skip this patrol, but you have to be careful about how you do it. So I'm in the dungeon right now, and as you can see, this pack moves really slowly. So what you'll want to do is at the start of the dungeon, as soon as the key goes in, you're going to want to mount up, and you're going to yeet yourself right off this little hill, hug the edge of the wall here, grab this pack. You're not going to need any kicks. These soul cleavers don't really do much outside of like doing melee stuff, and you're going to actually pull through to come up to this area here. My opie stopped working for some reason, so I can't access the markers, but you're going to want to just pull them through, and you're probably going to end up pulling one of these patrols here, like this patrol here, or I guess down here, these guys as well. So you want to be careful of that, but not pulling these mobs at the start is gonna help your percentage not be like insane over. These mobs will put you about 108%, so you don't want to do that. But that's pretty much the dungeon. I'm not going to show any footage for this one because I don't feel like I need to. If you guys want some kind of footage or a video guide, I'll do it. But for this video in particular, I'm just going to be talking about routes for this dungeon at least. I might show some in the other side. So speaking of the other side, let's jump over to that dungeon. All right, so now we're over at the other side. The other side? We'll be proper, the other side. And this dungeon is super tight. This reminds me a lot of King's Rest. Like, you have to pull almost everything. It's very linear, and the bosses kind of suck. So we're going to kind of talk about exactly some of the strategies that are going to go on here. I'll include some footage in the overlay and talk about a few different things, but for the most part, we're going to mainly be just strictly talking about route in this guide. Now, at the start of the dungeon, you're going to start at the very north end of the map here. I think it's the same in-game, at least in Mythic Dungeon Tools. It has the entrance is up here. So you're going to start with this very first pull. It's up to you if you want to pull them together. If you can handle 3 kicks on the cultists, you can. The thing is, getting this cultist down the stairs is kind of a pain in the ass. So I recommend just pulling the 2 at a time and then going down to the bottom. If your group can or is confident enough to pull off this pull with a hero, that's great. This is a 42-minute dungeon. Timer, so you can in theory get 5 heroes if you hero on like literally on cooldown as soon as it comes up. So you can start with a hero here, which could be effective, but that's totally up to your group. I always recommend going clockwise. Now, for the most of the time that I played beta and even on live doing Mythic Zeros, I go counterclockwise because that's the boss order of the dungeon. But going counterclockwise actually might provide a little bit more beneficial because you have better control over your prideful timings, and that's really going to be the key here. So if you're someone who's not doing M10 or like M plus 10s and you're doing just below that, and you're never going to have to deal with prideful, you can kind of go whichever route you want, but feel free to stick around and listen to what some of these mobs do. But most of you are probably plan on doing prideful and doing plus 10, plus 15, plus 20s. This might be a fairly good route, I would say, with some of the prideful timings. Going clockwise, Night Fae have a few different things in this dungeon. I know that I'm really throwing this in here randomly, but I kind of want to talk about this, is that they have urns. So these urns are able to be used, and what they do is they do a giant like 25-yard radius AoE stun for like 10 seconds. It's really good. It'll lock down mini bosses, it'll lock down regular mobs, it'll lock down elite mobs. It stuns everything that it possibly hits. This is going to be very beneficial to any Night Fae player. While it provides no damage or no like stats or buffs, having a 10-second lockdown on this dungeon is going to provide extremely useful because there is a lot of magical damage and a lot of kicks that are required in a lot of these pulls. So using the urn effectively is going to be a huge boon to your group. So you're going to have your first urn, which is going to be out on this platform. So you can actually do a fairly big pull here with the 3 cultists and the Death Speaker. This Death Speaker, you can... If you can assign kicks before pulling this to help get them to this urn, they're a little bit out of range. So, you know, if you have an auto marker, that I highly recommend getting that for this. If not, you're going to just want to make sure you're getting appropriate kicks, knockback, stuns, death grips, whatever you can to get them a little bit closer to this urn, pop it and blow them up. After that, it's pretty important you pull this pat. So this patrol actually walks all the way up and he will walk into you. If you get unlucky, I think at the start of the dungeon, he should be patrolling away. By the time you get up here and defeat this pack, he should be getting up to this platform. If you have a way to distract him or CC him or root him or whatever you can, you could do that and then blow him up on this platform. The reason it's important to get him here is because he is worth a whopping 2%. That doesn't sound like a lot when I say it out loud, but it'll put you in a better spot for prideful. And what I mean by that is once you come into the Ardenweald side, you can actually do a fairly large pull here because these mobs aren't too dangerous. Just make sure you're jumping if you have the debuff on you. There's a debuff that stacks up to 10, and as soon as it hits 10, it puts you asleep for 15 seconds, which is insane. It can be dispelled, but if too many players get stunned at the same time, it's going to be pretty annoying for some of the DPS. So if you have the curse on you, just make sure you're jumping from these from the moths. These Elder Staghorns, just bring them in. They do mainly physical damage, pretty easy to blow them all up. So this will be a pull of 8s. And doing this here will give you your first Prideful. So what you can do after this is actually you can stack up. You know, you have room to defeat Prideful up here. And then you're going to actually have access to do a fairly large pull with the Prideful buff, blowing up some of these things. So I have these all marked just because if you look here, there's like 30 different pulls in this dungeon. So I just have them all marked in the same. I would split this in half for the most part. It's like what I would, it just depends on your comp. Like if you have a Ret Paladin in your group, pull it all. If you have any uncapped AoE players in your group, pull everything. YOLO, what can happen? You'll want to probably split this into 2. I would pull these mobs all together, blow them up with the Prideful buff, and you'll probably still have the Prideful buff after that. And then you're going to need to pull the mini boss plus a few additional mobs. I just marked these. You could pull some of these birds. You could pull some of these stealth. These guys are invisible, so you're going to have to actually proximity pull them. There's an urn here. It will stun the mini boss. That was a weird X. You can stun the mini boss as well, so you can pull a lot of the stuff onto the urn and just use it and just stun them all if you have a Night Fae. If you don't have a Night Fae, you cannot do this. I'm going to keep reiterating that the rest of the dungeon. But this is a good spot to use that urn. You're still going to have some Prideful buff. You're going to get a really fat stun on the mini boss who has an insane amount of health. I do have to set it at 25 Tyrannical for some reason. I'm assuming it's because last time I used MDT was in BFA. But this guy's going to have a lot of health, but you're going to be able to bring him up, stun him. He does a fear, which is really annoying. The fear is actually proximity based. It's like an 8-yard circle. He actually sucks you in. If you can outrun it, great. If not, Tremor Totem works. Berserker Rage can obviously remove fears. If you have the trinket from this guy, I think it also can remove it if you use it at the right time. And then you're going to want to just make sure this mob dies. This is all going to set you up for a Prideful right after this pack. So you're going to be able to AoE this stuff down, and then you're going to be able to actually get a big amount of damage onto either Zera with, like, I would say maybe, I think, depends on obviously the level of the dungeon, but if you can get through this pack here pretty quickly, you're going to have like 20 to 30 seconds of Prideful buff left for this. If you want to, you can Shroud down if you have a rogue, get Prideful on the boss, and then you can come back up and pull a few of these extra birds and little Spriggan dudes back up here and get extra percent. What you need to pull here, I don't know, but if you have a rogue in your group and you want to maximize your Prideful damage onto a boss, you can do that by just skipping down this hill here. So we'll throw a little arrow in if you want to. So you'll be able to just skip right down there. As soon as you defeat this boss, you're actually going to teleport right back to the start, like here-ish area. Is that even showing up? Yeah, you can see that pretty easily. You're going to have to run back through the hallway, and then you're back outside. The big thing here is that you're going to have a lot of ground to cover. So mount up, run down the hill, and at the very bottom here, you're going to have a fairly big pull here. I like to pull these all together, and the reason for that is you're going to have 2 priority targets, meaning that you can have one as a priority target to have effective cleave, have second priority target as effective cleave, and then that should be able to actually put you in a nice spot. These guys will enrage themselves, and they can't die while they're enraged. So having a Soothe in your group is going to be extremely beneficial. That's why I want to mark one of these as a priority target, because if all the DPS are targeting it and cleaving it down, or cleaving off of it, this mob will hit a threshold to be soothed a lot earlier. So a druid or a hunter can soothe that target, it will die. Then you can swap to this target, and by the time it's about to die, you'll have soothe probably back up because it's a 10-second cooldown. And then these mobs honestly don't do much, so pulling them onto this isn't going to be that dangerous. Honestly, most of it's physical damage. These guys have AoE that's avoidable, so outside of that, it's pretty easy. I highly recommend pulling to this edge of the platform because this patrol will come all the way up and down these stairs, so he does end about here, maybe a little bit forward. So you just want to make sure you're not going to accidentally pull out. So if you have some range who are, off in the corner, off in the middle of the platform, they need to be aware of this patrol in particular. Outside of that, you'll just run back up into this instance, or up into this wing of Mechagon. A few things to note is that a lot of players don't know this, but this dental drill here, his haywire mechanic, it does a lot of damage and it could be healed through, but I can imagine in higher keys, you're probably going to want to actually do the mechanic properly. So what this mob does is it actually does like an AoE that can be line of sighted. So there's a corner here. The map doesn't show it too well, but you can pull him up into this corner, or maybe even into this corner here if you'd like. And you just simply have to LOS. So your group can LOS. I recommend the tank LOSing as well. It's hard to get effective damage this way, but the damage might be too high at certain levels of high fortified keys that you're going to need to LOS around one of these corners while he's doing his haywire mechanic. So this pull will also puts you right up to about the threshold we're going to need to do Prideful. This next pack here, this purple group, these guys will kill themselves eventually after like 5 or 10 seconds in combat. You'll want to keep them rooted somehow or slowed. So I always drop an Ursal's Vortex, but for whatever reason, if you're running Mass Root as a Guardian Druid or a Resto Druid, Mass Root these and tag them with like a Sunfire or a Moonfire. And then these guys you'll just kind of pull back, probably just outside of the room. It's probably a good spot to be. You don't want to pull them in the doorway because this mechanical dog will target a random player and cast a stun at them. That's a fairly large AoE. So having a full room to work with is going to be a little bit better than having this like awkward hallway to work with. And then this mob, the Headless Client, just needs to be knocked back. You could double it up with this pull as well. Your whole group needs to be aware of positioning because when they're spinning around, they get knocked back in the direction that their attacks are coming from. So melee are going to knock them backwards. So if there's melee behind the mobs, they'll either knock them into the tank or the tank will knock them back into the melee DPS. So I recommend everyone being on the same side, slowly backing out of the room as you defeat these mobs. And then you just want to make sure you're getting kicks on their casts. Not too much to it. Their casts don't do a lot of damage, but if they can like keep getting off, it's just going to be a nightmare for your healer. This pull here is going to set you up for a Prideful ad. You can defeat the Prideful ad here. It's going to give you a lot of damage for this pull in particular, and a little bit of damage going through this room. This pack, for whatever reason, is all linked as, you know, group 10. They're not linked. These two will pull together. These two up here. These guys are all individual, though. This mob will pull by itself, so will this mob. Same thing here with these guys. These ones you're going to want to tag and pull out. I recommend Ursal's, Mass Grip, any kind of... Not Mass Grip. Oh, that would be dangerous. Like an Ursal's, a Mass Root, anything like, you know, a Frost Mage's Frozen Orb, Sigil of Chains. You can Mass Grip them together on top of this ad eventually, just however your group wants to do it. With this room, I highly recommend having everyone, just the tank tag one and pull it back, or pull them forward. This room is really annoying because what happens in this room, if you're not familiar or if you don't understand how this room works, there are slimes that pat across the little rivers or pipes here. And if you run into one, it'll like do a lot of damage. It'll knock players back. It can stun players. It's a mess. You don't want to hit any of the slimes, and weaving through them is a little difficult. There's a few ways around this. If you have a Warlock in your group, Lockgate can reach all the way across, which is awesome. You can use Door of Shadows if you're a Venthyr, which is great. Heroic Leap, Grappling Hook, you know, Demonic Jump or whatever, that Infernal Strike or whatever Demon Hunters do. I don't know what their abilities are called. They're just a magic buff. You can all skip this. If you have an engineer in your group, this is important. If you have an engineer, there's a little council right underneath where these mobs are positioned on this in MDT. These mobs are actually on the second platform, but nonetheless, there's a switch here. And if you're an engineer, you can actually flip that switch and it's going to shut off the slimes. And the slimes are going to stop spawning. And you can just run through this room. You can use it to pull mobs into. But it's just going to make it a lot easier for your group to get through. So if you're an engineer, keep note of that. It's really useful. It's really helpful. But if not, just have to weave your way through. I recommend once you pull these two groups, pull these two into the next room. I wouldn't pull more than 2 lubricators into this because these essential oils or sentient oils cast essential oils, and these casts need to be kind of locked down if you can. So this is a little bit of a tedious area. You can have to just work your way through slowly but surely. But once you get through, you're going to run up to the boss room. Again, Mana Storms this is an annoying boss. I'll do a boss guide in the future. Once you defeat them, you jump down the sewer, which should be located right here. That is a weird arrow. That didn't even exist. This sewer little drain pipe, you jump down, you run out of the room, and you head back into the main area. This is a long fucking route. So if you didn't pull this patrol before, which you shouldn't have, you'll have to do this patrol. There is an urn. We'll change this back to blue because Night Fae. There is an urn right here. I recommend using it. It's going to give you a nice big window just to knock this guy's front teeth out. You can also use it on his like Enrage Masks cast or his actual Rage cast as well if you want to. That is super useful. The Enrage Masks that he spawns, you can actually CC them using Disorients, Blinds, Stuns, Knockbacks, and it's going to reduce the damage that your group is going to be taking. And then right before he casts his Rage cast, you can pop the urn. One of the scariest pulls in here is going to be this group right before you go into Zul'Gurub. This pack is similar to the one you did on the other side. What's nice is it's a little bit more grouped up. Downside is you don't have an urn to use. So I highly recommend making sure you have assigned kicks to the one cultist and the death speaker in here, and melee and range need to be aware of where the death speaker is facing, because he will target a random mob or random ally in your group, and he'll shoot out a giant beam that will knock players back like 30 yards. And if you're a ranged position near one of the edges, you will probably lose your life and have to respawn and run back. This will set you up, this pack here will set you up for a nice prideful buff. The prideful buff isn't the greatest, but it'll give you a little bit of leeway in this area here, because some of these mobs are just really annoying to deal with. This first group, I like to pull this Hexer back, assign a kick to the Hexer, assign a kick to the Priest. Hexer casts Hex, obviously, make sure this is being kicked. If it's not actually a Hex, it's like a polymorph. So it's a magic dispel, not a curse dispel. Just something that's going to be kind of useful to know. So only the healer can dispel the Hex. And then the High Priest is going to cast like Smite and Heals. Make sure you're kicking the heals, obviously. These devoted, you don't want to get their you don't want to let their cast get off. If their casts get off, they spawn serpents, and the serpents, when they die, will just destroy the ground in a giant magical debuff AoE red pool that does a lot of damage and will cover the whole entire hallway, even if you have them attached to like the left hand side or right hand side of the room. So make sure you're stunning them, whether it's either use AoE stun, like rotation, like if you have like a Warlock Shadow Fury, maybe into a Shaman's Incap or a Disorienting Roar, Blinding Light, or you'll just want to make sure you're individually stunning or somehow disrupting or knocking back their casts. That's like the biggest tip I can get. You're going to be really annoyed if these devotees cast get off. This next pull is a little sketch. I have them together, and the reason I do is because you'll want to kick the High Priest. You'll be able to get the High Priest then into this group, and there is a little urn right here. This urn you can use to just destroy this pack by stunning it, and you can just use cooldowns to blow it up. And then lastly, you'll finish up with this pack, and this last pack should actually put you at a nice ripe 99.2. So my route was short. Let me go back and fix that really quick, and I'll let you know what I changed. After this, you'll do Hakar. So heading back into the Night Fae area, or the Ardenweald area, you can pull in one of these birds, I guess one of these matriarchs. So let's just, I guess, click on this pull here. We'll grab this guy. This will shift down the prideful spawns. Let's just double check. Nope, pridefuls all look the same. So this will give you a prideful right before Hakar, which will put you in a nice good spot. Your other option is, for whatever reason, if you did the counterclockwise route, you don't have to pull these two mobs. You can still use this urn, and then you'll be able to actually get the prideful buff for this boss. So if you happen to pull counterclockwise, you can. That's another strategy you can use to get a prideful for Musala. Honestly, though, you don't want to do that, because this boss works in a weird way where it's, you don't, like, the damage to him that you do is fairly effective, because you still need to do 10% of his max health or HP over the fight. So the prideful buff could be useful, or the healing buff could be useful for your healer. But honestly, you're going to have a better time having a prideful buff maybe for Hakar or other bosses or other trash packs in here. So that's pretty much the other side, the route that I have planned currently. Rogues or any other kind of skipping class aren't going to be as useful in this dungeon just because it's so linear. But the only option you really have is, okay, do I go left or do I go right? And some of the patrols, when you pull them, is going to be very specific. Any player who played a lot during Season 2 of BFA with a Reaping is going to have a good understanding of how Prideful works. Prideful is just kind of awkward. It just, the mobs will spawn at, or every 20% the mobs spawn. So being very tedious with when you are hitting those benchmarks is going to make or break a dungeon run. And that's pretty much it. That covers both of my current routes for both of these two dungeons for Ardenweald. Overall, I really like the dungeons. I think Mists of Tirna is definitely going to be more of a fun dungeon. I think it's going to be one that's a little bit more enjoyable for most of the player base and also my group. I've had a lot of fun in this one so far. The other side is just a little bit too linear for my likingness. Also, the bosses feel like actual, more or less, raid bosses compared to dungeon bosses. So I think it's going to be a pug's nightmare doing the other side, at least in higher keys, especially with how linear it is and some of the prideful. Prideful can get messed up fairly easily in that dungeon. That, at least that's what I'm kind of assuming. So if you like this kind of content, please hit that like button. It lets me know that I should keep doing content like this. If you are new here, welcome, and hit that sub button if you like the content. I will be doing the last two zones that I haven't covered yet. I'll be covering more than likely Maldraxxus next. I'll probably be putting out that video tomorrow or the following day. And then as the season begins, I'll have that last Revendreth zone, those dungeons ready for you guys as well. So I'm super stoked for the season. I hope you guys are as well. And until next time, take care.